Recording.
Yeah.
No, I too have proved my worth, Odin.
I didn't know that God King Scoville got an invite to our voice call, but apparently here he is. And something that has also got an invite to our voice call is Halls of Valor and Shadownmoon Burial Grounds being unveiled as the final two dungeons that are going to be returning in Dragonflight for the Season 1 rotation. So we've talked about this a couple times about the Season 1 rotation just in general. We knew that Court of Stars and Temple of the Jade Serpent were going to be legacy dungeons that were returning. Now Halls of Valor from Legion and Shadownmoon Burial Grounds, one of the Warlords of Draenor dungeons, will be returning, and this was reported on Wowhead earlier this week. In addition to that, the 4 Dragonflight dungeons that are going to be present for the first season have also been data mined by Wowhead, and those are Ruby Life Pools, Algothore Academy, No Cut Offensive, and Azure Vaults. I think let's start by talking about the elephant in the room here with Halls of Valor and Shadownmoon Burial Grounds. How are you feeling? Initial reaction to Halls of Valor being the dungeon that is going to be coming back?
All right, so first off, I still would rather just see 8 new dungeons for Season 1 and start doing the old dungeons later. We've talked about that before. Don't want to rehash it again here, but I still stand by that.
Okay.
Given that they're not doing that, I think Halls of Valor is also a mistake.
Okay.
I feel like that dungeon wasn't all that popular of a dungeon among, at least among people I knew, and you could make the argument that part of that was because it was a super long dungeon, and so it wasn't necessarily like bad mechanics or anything like that. It was just like it was a not fun key to see because it was such a long dungeon. But like whether or not that's why, that's still true about it, even when you bring it back. So I suspect it will be a key that you're hoping not to see in your weekly vault, and I think that's unfortunate.
There's a lot with Halls of Valor that it left me questioning like why they picked this dungeon out of all the Legion dungeons. Specifically, the fact that it was so long is one of the reasons. But to Blizzard's credit, I would say this dungeon is about 10 out of 10 aesthetically. Like just overall, the general look of the dungeon is something that is very positive. In addition to that, while it was a 45-minute timer back in Legion, it was like a very soft 45-minute timer. There were a lot of runs that would finish in 38 minutes if you didn't have any wipes or anything. The big thing for me is that there's going to have to be a large amount of technical changes with just functionally how that dungeon works. Primarily one-shots on the bosses. I think Herja in particular has to get basically a full rework with how the Expel Light and the Lightning works. On top of that, there was a decent amount of RP and run back time. It's kind of similar to DOS in that regard that I think could use some modernization. And in addition to that, there's a lot of trash that has heavy caster packs that we were just more well equipped to deal with back in Legion. And so I think that Blizzard is going to need to spend actually not an insignificant amount of developer time in order to modernize this dungeon to get it to a state where it is playable. But I do think that if they take that time and put in that effort, it can actually move towards a dungeon where it's like, okay, I'm actually very happy to see this. But if it got copy pasted from Legion to right now, I'm kind of in a similar boat as Dratnos. I don't know. Like, I kind of question like why this was the pick.
Yeah, I mean, Lower Karazhan, it worked pretty well. Over the first month from when Lower Kara came out to now, it's gotten a lot better. Like, that dungeon is much more,
okay,
I would say, one that I don't mind seeing in my exclamation point keys command anymore. But I worry that, like, okay, they kind of got away with doing that over the first month after Season 4 came out because Season 4 was, this kind of small side season thing.
Yeah.
If they do that with Halls of Valor on Dragonflight release, I feel like that would be a lot worse. Like, I feel like that month of tweaking and, like, removing the problematic abilities in that dungeon and removing the Fervent Strikes and nerfing Opera 4 times and Morose twice and Ottoman twice and Maiden twice, right? Like, that round of nerfs, I feel like that needs to actually come before Dragonflight launch rather than after, or at least many of those need to come before rather than after for it to be good.
I think that kind of makes sense too. It's one of those things that it depends on when Mythic Plus hits the beta. So as of current recording this, Mythic Plus is still not on the beta test ROMs. I suspect it's going to be coming in the next, probably this week even, I would guess. Maybe the week after that. I'm not 100% sure, but just I have a hunch that it's soon. Because like we got to kind of get a move on, and if Halls of Valor is able to be tested and be thoroughly tested on the beta, which dungeons on the expansion betas are normally way more thoroughly tested than on like a 0.5 PTR, I suspect that they could get HOV to a point where it's not one-shotty and this state where it's like kind of unfun to play. So let's move on to Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. I don't think we need it. Did you have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah, one more thing about Halls of Valor. They have at least made one change. You know that Bridge of Light to the end of the dungeon now? Yeah. There's now invisible walls, so you can't fall off the sides if you aim yourself off the side. So do try that in your next Halls of Valor run. It is 100% safe now, trust. So Shadowmoon Burial Ground.
Yeah, so Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is a dungeon that we have actually never seen implemented as a Mythic Plus dungeon. So with Halls of Valor, we kind of know what to expect. We've seen it as an M Plus dungeon. Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, last time we saw it was a challenge mode in Warlords. And there was some trash, just particularly at the beginning with like the elementals and the bone soldiers that did some weird casts, and they had a lot of weird mechanics. I think the upsides of Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, they have some interesting bosses, and there's like these spiders and bats trash that don't do a lot. There are a lot of overall pad feeder stuff. But I think with how Iron Docks and Grimrail Depot went down, I'm really interested to see how Shadowmoon Burial Grounds kind of fares, because there were some things about these older dungeons in particular that caught me off guard, specifically mechanics telegraphing, I think, being the biggest thing, and interrupts being another one of them.
Yeah, no interrupts throughout a lot of these dungeons, which I think Shadowmoon Burial Grounds actually has a few, but
it does.
Iron Docks has
it certainly does have some.
And then like abilities that would just like they aimed at a player, they were dodgeable, but they didn't give you any swirly or anything like that. Iron Docks, they've added swirlies to most of those abilities. And I think they should probably do that for Shadowmoon Burial Grounds as well, because the knowledge that like, oh, when this ability casts, you have to kind of just start moving randomly and hope that you dodge it and make sure you're not standing where anybody used to be standing, I don't think is a particularly good skill to test, especially because so much of it is like knowledge and weak aura based solution rather than like good reactive gameplay.
I think my opinions on Shadowmoon Burial Grounds are really mixed because I haven't actually played it as an M plus dungeon and we haven't seen it in such a long time. I think it's one of those things that you kind of need to wait and see how it feels, because it does have some redeeming qualities, but on the downsides, it's linear. It's like 100% linear. There's not much room for skill expression in regards to pulls, but like Grimrail Depot was linear, and I think that people were very down on it at the very beginning, and I think that people have kind of gotten a little bit more positive on it. Not necessarily like overwhelmingly positive, but it's better than the initial outcry of, oh my god, this dungeon has a train.
Yeah, I think that a couple of straight line dungeons in a season is fine. It's just like, I also want there to be some dungeons where I can, like, a nice thing about lower is, oh, do I want to do the kitchen stuff? Do I want to do the spider stuff? Do I want to like skip here or do this boss and this sort? Like a couple dungeons that have that open feel to them, I think is pretty important. But it's fine if there are some linear ones.
Do you want to hit Court of Stars and Jade Serpent next, or do we want to hit the new dungeons first?
I guess just real quick on, so Jade Serpent is one that I was actually pretty worried about. I didn't think there was just much going on in that dungeon, so we'll have to see when that gets upgraded to M plus if they can.
Notably, not a lot. Very short timer though. Like that's one of the big things. So Court of Stars and Jade Serpent kind of have this where they're unbelievably short dungeons. Just as a general rule, Court of Stars timer was 30 minutes, and Jade Serpent is 4 bosses and 3 pulls of trash, 2 pulls of trash, something like that. I think it's like 3 or 4 pulls of trash in total. And so both of these dungeons are unbelievably short. I suspect that I hope that Jade Serpent is cool. I know that Court of Stars can be decent though. Yeah,
Court of Stars is an interesting one because I see a lot of people being like, why are they bringing Court of Stars back again, right? Because it was like the Legion Time Walking. It was in Legion Time Walking M+, which, by the way, is going away in Dragonflight. They're moving over to this like returning dungeons and seasons thing. I think the reason they're doing that is because like they think Court of Stars is a great dungeon, and they see that not a lot of people actually did the Time Walking M+, because I think that's probably why that whole thing is they're changing over to this model instead. So I don't know. That being said, like Court of Stars, I was really hyped for Court of Stars to be in Legion Time Walking, but I've kind of cooled on it ever since, like, especially looking at this expansion. I want to have my characters doing the profession stuff and like doing that during my non-rating time. And I do not want to have my characters playing blacksmithing, engineering, or whatever, so I can do Court of Stars effectively. That would be really painful.
I think that the big thing is, like, we talked about this, all of the dungeons have to be refurbed in some form or fashion. Like all the old ones need to be, varying degrees of changes need to happen to them to make sure that they're in a state where they like mechanically, just on some bosses, on some trash packs, more fit a bit more in line with how current mechanics work in the modern day and age of M+. And I think that one of them is how the professions work in Court of Stars specifically, because it's like, okay, that's not really something that's super feasible for a lot of players to be able to have the amount of professions or classes or whatever that it takes, especially whenever the profession-based buffs are so polarizing, and missing out on one or two of them costs you a substantial amount of time.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, let's talk about Ruby Life Pools, Algothore Academy, No Code Offensive, and Azure Vault. So right here, this is Algothore Academy. Basically, I've tested all of these dungeons on the beta. How many have you tested? Have you tested them all as well?
I've tested, I think, half of these.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't done Algothore Academy.
Algothore's kind of interesting. It's I think it's fairly straightforward. It's kind of buggy right now on the beta. As you saw me, it gave me the alert to go back, and eventually I ended up accidentally getting sent to Orgrimmar. But it's actually a fairly straightforward dungeon with like the bosses and whatnot. Like you are on these bridges. It's people kind of compared it to Spires of Ascension, how you have to jump from landmass to landmass, but I swear it feels a lot better than what Spires of Ascension did. I don't think that there's a lot of room for skill expression in regards to pathing differential as it currently stands with this dungeon, but I thought that like the visuals were very good in this dungeon. I didn't have too many issues with just mechanically how the dungeons function, although, again, these are opinions based off doing heroic dungeons scaled to like 340 item level, and so I can obviously change my opinion once they come out in Mythic Plus and I have a little bit more experience with the dungeons and see like some of the strategies for how things are going to actually function. But overall, I think Algothore Academy is pretty decent. It's got some good bosses. It actually has a decent amount of trash that has minimally intrusive mechanics, and it doesn't seem like there's anything that's like super sus. But again, at this point, you wouldn't be getting punished overly by heroic dungeon mechanics.
Yeah, so maybe early to tell there. How were the boss fights in the dungeon?
I thought that they died before they did mechanics in a lot of these dungeons. There was specifically like, yeah, this is just a situation where bosses die way too fast, or where you really can tell with a lot of them just how the mechanics are supposed to work. I thought for Algothore, I thought it was okay. Like there was the tree, I think the tree boss in particular, Overgrown Ancient. He spawned a decent amount of ads fairly regularly, and I thought that was going to be super interesting. I think if you don't kill them fast enough, they end up stunning you. So,
okay.
You have to really make sure to pry them down.
There's Ruby Life Pools. That's like a pretty quick.
I don't have footage of that one.
20-minute adventure.
That is by far the shortest. They have added
some more trash to it, but it's still pretty quick, right?
Yeah, so if you tested it early on, you would know this, or if you saw testing of it early on, like basically they added trash between the second and the third boss, which I think makes a decent amount of sense. It was a bit weird, but again, yeah, even still, I don't even know how they would ever put a 30-minute timer. It's a 3-boss dungeon, and 30 minutes is a generous timer for that kind of 3-minute endeavor.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about, because Halls of Valor had a 45-minute timer, so if we have something under 30 minutes and something 45 minutes, I feel like that differential is going to be really huge.
I mean, we had Maw of Souls at that one time.
Yeah, which was a huge problem.
Yeah.
That was a huge balancing problem for that whole expansion, right? The relative dungeon time.
That kind of did eat all of the weekly keys, because you would just go into the 24-minute dungeon and you would just always do that one.
Then there's Noku Defensive. This is the Dragon Riding Dungeon, which I was worried about the idea of a Dragon Riding Dungeon, but the way that you just kind of use it to go from one pull to another, and you're not actually like doing a boss fight with dragon riding or combat with it, I think makes quite a bit of sense. So I'm reasonably optimistic about this one.
I think just general thoughts is it's very surprising how many bosses, just as a general rule, have ads that are attached to them. So not the first boss here, but a lot of the bosses that you test just have periodic ads that end up spawning, which I'm not going to complain. Like I like this kind of thing. No Code Offensive doesn't have that many, like, but even still, they do have like either bosses have like damage amps, or they have ads that end up spawning periodically, just over the course of the whole entire dungeon. And it's a very interesting decision to see how Blizzard is no longer taking you and forcing you to do just a bunch of patchwork style fights, and they're giving you a little bit more of a different damage profile that's promoted in Mythic Plus.
Interesting. And then the last one is
Azure Vault.
Azure Vault. What's that one about?
So I don't think I have footage on. I think I did it yesterday, so I don't have it footage on VOD here. So basically, what you do is this is the dungeon that I actually really like the least. I think that just functionally how a lot of the trash works. There's a lot of ground swirlies in Azure Vaults, and they end up either there's runes that silence you, there's runes that polymorph you. You can get disoriented for 8 seconds as well. Like there's a lot of ground effects that come out very fast, and they're hard to see because it's like purple on purple surface, and it could very well be because I'm bad and I'm new to the dungeon, but I thought it was fairly frustrating. In addition to that, I did not like a large majority of the trash, just as a general rule in Azure Vaults, and I thought that especially at the beginning, you're promoted very heavily to skip a lot of the trash. It also, as a dungeon, feels kind of disjointed in a very weird way, and it may be because I'm new, but it's not very clear where you're supposed to be going at every single moment, and you use these books as like teleporters to get around. Additionally, none of the dungeons on the beta right now have any checkpoints. So
pain.
I think that's something that's going to come in time, hopefully, but it is something that I'm like, why do none of these dungeons have checkpoints? I think Azure Vaults, though, overall, I'm not super hot on. I'm pretty good on the other 3 Dragonflight dungeons, though. There are actually other Dragonflight dungeons that I'm super, like, pretty big stonks on, and so I do wonder at that point is this system, like you stated at the very beginning of the video, is this really the right way of doing it with the 4 Dragonflight dungeons? Because I noticed a couple of other dungeons and I'm like, I'd rather play that.
Yeah, I mean, I we've talked about it before, but
yeah,
they're going in the starting with the legacy dungeons in season 1 thing, which, fair enough. I'll give it a try, but I still disagree with it.
Okay, anything super notable about the loot pool? I think that's like the last thing that we really need to hit before we bounce out of this video.
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, Halls of Valor Court of Stars don't have any weapons because Legion didn't have weapons. So there's a little bit less weapons in the total loot pool as a result. Every spec still gets at least something, but I think it's like Agi. It's like druids, right? Agi druids that only have 1 M+ weapon.
They have 2. They have 2 stabs.
2. Okay.
I think just in general, the Dragonflight dungeons have the most amount of like weapons for a lot of specs. Most specs have a substantial amount of just weapons in general from these new dungeons, and I think that may be due to just like counterbalance the Legion dungeons not providing any weapons, because like Dratnos mentioned, you had the artifact weapon, so you didn't need any weapons back in Legion, so it didn't make any sense. But conversely, now these new dungeons have 5 and 6 weapons per dungeon, and some of them actually have interesting effects. I think the Stormlash one, it has a similar effect to the Rod In Slapper, and it's like a Warglaive for Demon Hunter. It's your damaging abilities and auto attacks have a chance to lash the target for 11,000 nature damage. Now, is this weapon good? I have no idea. Absolutely no clue. But is it something that it's like a very interesting effect on a weapon that could be decent? Yeah, sure.
Then we have the old dungeon loot, including some trinkets. So Shadow Burial Grounds has strength primary stat, on use crit 2 minutes.
Okay.
And it has verse secondary stat, on use crit 2 minutes. Those are the 2 trinkets out of that dungeon. And then Temple of the Jade Serpent only has 1 trinket in the whole dungeon. And it is Windswept Pages, an Agi trinket that has haste proc when your attacks hit something.
So
and it's on the old proc ICD model rather than the new RPPM model as well.
So this is actually something that's kind of important for like the older dungeons. So basically Warlords and Mists of Pandaria dungeons just in general, you got basically stat sticks or
and even Legion there's basically a stat stick as well from Halls of Valor, the pack, Hunger the Pack thing.
Yeah, Hunger the Pack trinket. Yeah, so you end up getting a lot of stat sticks and stuff like that from those dungeons. Whenever we were talking about the Season 4 dungeons, we mentioned things like primary stat jewelry. It seems like that didn't even come into fruition in Season 4. I would suspect that that's going to be the case again for Season 1. But this is this is again one of the reasons that this system where it's like the 4 and 4 is happening is because like the loot pool is going to be super fresh, and then we're actually not even going to be able to get it for Season 2. In addition to that, other trinkets that I've seen that are kind of interesting. So the Horn of Valor from Halls of Valor, I think, is something that could be useful. We saw it. I remember this being very heavily required for early Mythic Il'gynoth kills back in Emerald Nightmare, where you would want all 20 players to have Horn of Valor. They would pop it at the same time, and then they would burn Il'gynoth because it was like a 45-second burn, and the proc on the main stat effect on Horn of Valor lasts 30 seconds. So that was good. It could be used in a situation kind of similar if there's no super strong on-use trinket coming out of these dungeons. In addition to that, I did some skimming before this video. This trinket from Azure Vault seems fairly good for specifically like fire mages. You summon a rune at your location, and while you stand within it, all you and your party members who are standing within it gain primary stat, but lose a lot of critical strike. And so obviously this would be pretty decent for fire mages. But or you could use it to grief your friends, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it's probably a damage increase for every, like, double the amount of main stat as you're losing of crit.
It's better, especially if you don't have this much crit to lose.
It is weird. Yeah, you or your party members gain. I mean, it's also just like an on-use trinket that you can make a healer use to buff your damage. So, that may be something like I'm not sure about the fact that it affects your party. I'm not sure that that's going to lead to good gameplay.
Yeah, this is true.
Especially like if it reduces your crit below 0. Then you're losing downside on that as well. Also, it could be a combo with Horn of Valor for double on use for Fire Mage again. Horn of Valor being a 30-second buff. Could be a double on use vibe.
Oh god, double on use trinkets.
Double on use for Moonkin as well. Could be.
Eyes of cringe. All right. Yeah. The only other thing that I saw that was like kind of interesting. Everything else was more or less kind of the same. This miniature singing stone, I don't even know how good this is going to be. Healers are probably in the comments already chatting right now, explaining why I'm dumb. But basically, you shield a target and then whenever the shield expires, the effect repeats on up to 4 additional allies. I could see this being good in the situation where M+ dungeons are kind of similar to where they are right now, where you're trying to survive one-shots. If you're trying to survive one-shots, I suspect that the healer running a shielding trinket is probably not bad. Outside
also,
of that,
the auto attack ring coming back for another season, so we'll see if they have to nerf that again.
That thing got bugged that one time too.
But yeah, that's our quick look at the loot and stuff from this season's M+ pool. Nothing huge, but a bunch of potentially interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think overall the loot seems fairly reasonable. I'm really interested to see what the dungeons just in general are going to end up like looking like. Specifically, like these older dungeons, Court of Stars, Halls of Valor, Shadowmoon Barrier Grounds, and Temple of the Jade Serpent. I suspect that the Dragonflight dungeons are going to be fine outside of Azure Vault, which I don't have high hopes for. But again, without testing these dungeons in M+, it's always hard to kind of get like a super big gauge on what they're going to look like. Again, you have to port around with books, and it's kind of weird.
Yes.
Anything else? Any final words?
No.
All right. I think that's going to be it for us today.
Comments.
Hopefully next week they have M+ enabled so we can make another video.
No, I meant you guys comments below. Yes.
What are they going to comment?
Comment your thoughts on the topics we discussed. GN.